Yo, what's up, you guys? It's your girl, Treaty LPC, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Self-Aware and Effed Up podcast. I really just wanted to take a moment before we dive into today's episode just to say thank you for all of the love and support that you guys have been giving this podcast. We are definitely making waves, and we are definitely changing the face of the way we look at mental health within the community. So I just wanted to just take that moment before we dive in. I have a very special guest for this week's episode, Amani Meyer. She is an author of You Are the Prize. She's also an advocate, as well as just an all-around great individual. So she's going to share a little bit about her story today with us. She's going to tell a little bit more about who she is and why she wrote her book, You Are the Prize. So make sure you guys stay tuned, and we'll just go ahead and dive in. Welcome to the Self-Aware and Effed Up podcast, Amani. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm really grateful and thankful to be here.
Awesome. I am glad that you decided to take some time out of your schedule. I know you have a lot of speaking engagements going on and you're doing a lot out there. So I just really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. Just want to kick us off real quick. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, and also why you connect with the title Self-Aware and Effed Up? Because we all have our own self-aware and effed up story, but I want the audience to hear a little bit about yours.
Most definitely. So I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, born and raised, but I now reside in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And as you mentioned, I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a trainer, and a child welfare consultant. So that's sort of like the outside of who I am. But like I'm light, I'm compassion, I'm wisdom, I'm love, and most importantly, I'm human. And so I really, really appreciate this title, Self-Aware and Effed Up, because I think oftentimes we are taught that we need to be perfect and that we have flaws. And so for me, it's been really important for me to identify that it's okay for me to be human. It's okay for me to have flaws. Right. And it's okay to F up sometimes, because especially when you've gone through a lot of different things in your life, oftentimes people just expect for you to bounce back, and that's not always the case. But I will say that the things that I've gone through have actually allowed me to be more self-aware and for me to be and to feel more comfortable with the idea of being effed up and being imperfectly human. So I would describe myself as a beautiful mess.
Okay.
And I am on the journey of continuing, not just being self-aware, but turning that self-awareness into action, and then turning that action into transformative healing.
Wow. Yeah. You said a mouthful there, and you definitely hit on a lot of great things just in that short amount of time, because it is so important for us to use that self-awareness, not to stay in that place of effed upness, because we all have our flaws and none of us are perfect. And I love that you highlighted that, because so often, especially in today's society, especially with millennial generation, there's just this idea of perfectionism and having to be, and if you're not, then you're dealing with imposter syndrome, which I could, talk about all day long. But I definitely appreciate you highlighting that, because it's so very important. So I know you mentioned that you're an advocate, you're a speaker, you do a lot as it relates to that, and also working with foster care, which is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I know a lot of your work does focus on trauma, from what I read about you as I was preparing for the episode. And I'm just kind of curious, what led you to write about trauma in that particular focus area?
Yeah, definitely. So my book, You Are the Prize, Seeing Yourself Beyond the Imperfections of Your Trauma, is a book that I wrote specifically to not just highlight my own journey of growing up in the foster care system, but to really give voice to the things that I was experiencing. I feel like a lot of the things that I was experiencing went silenced, it went unrecognized, it noticed. And so for a really long time, I was experiencing the silence of my own pain. And so it was really important for me to write about and to talk about some of the issues that I've experienced, because what I also recognized through advocacy is that I wasn't the only one that was experiencing the things that I was experiencing, that other young people were experiencing similar things. And I've always been a person who has always stood up for myself, even if it always wasn't like the loudest voice in the room. But I always wanted to make sure that I spoke up on things, because, I was always like, this just doesn't sound fair, or it doesn't feel fair. And what I learned and what I recognized was that a lot of people were really grateful for the things that I was saying and for the things I was sharing, because they
Okay.
themselves didn't have the opportunity or the safe space to be able to speak up. And so in my book, I really wanted to normalize the things that I was experiencing, because as you know, and being a millennial, that
Mm,
when we've gone through trauma, especially as kids, I feel like the word trauma is something that has been just sort of new, especially when we talk about trauma in the brain, trauma on the body, trauma
exactly.
on the spirit,
Yeah.
trauma on your emotions. And oftentimes it's also a word that we also sort of want to stay away from, because we don't fully understand the impacts of it. And by me sharing my story and the things that I experienced, I really wanted to share with the world the things that I was experiencing, to help normalize that the trauma that I was experiencing are things that other people experience. And when we begin to normalize those things, I think we can just begin to really heal.
Right. Wow. Yeah. That, I mean, that's just such a powerful thing that you've been able to do, to take your own trauma and your own experience and then to turn around and be an advocate for others and give voice to them, because it is a little bit difficult, because that is a population of people who don't always have a say. It's kind of like you end up in this space where everyone's telling you what to do and no one's really listening to what's in your best interest. So I'm really happy that you found your voice, and even more ecstatic that you decided to use your voice and your gift to be able to give back to others. And I know that not everyone is able to do that. It takes a lot of strength and it takes a lot of courage. And I definitely admire that about you. Um, with
Thank you.
growing up and being involved in the foster care system, I mean, I know a lot of people who have been involved in the system itself, but what was growing up in the system like for you?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think especially what you shared earlier about your experience with growing up with a relative, I felt like I had sort of a unique journey into the
Mhm.
foster care system, because at birth, I was abandoned in the hospital by my parents,
Oh, wow.
because I was born with drugs in my system. And so, during that time, during the crack epidemic, that
Mm,
was a huge thing. And so from there, I ended up going into the foster care system,
okay.
and for about 6 months. And then I ended up being placed with my great aunt and
Mm,
my two other siblings for
wow.
about 10 years.
Okay.
And from there, I ended up moving with my mom for about 2 years. But it was during that time that there was just a lot of stuff going on. And so she ended up giving us back to the system. And it was at
Mm,
that time that I was separated from my siblings. And
mm,
so at the time, I didn't necessarily know what was going on. I was on the basketball court at my after school program when my social worker showed up
mm,
and just told me that I wasn't going back home. And so it was quite a shock that at that point you feel really powerless and you don't necessarily know what to do. You don't know what's going on. And then
right.
your protective factors, such as your siblings, who I had grown up with for 12 years, to
Mm,
all of a sudden be separated from them, it just changes your whole entire life.
yeah.
And so I didn't really have an opportunity to entirely process what was going on. I felt like my body did more of the processing than
Mm,
how my mind did. And I say that
yeah.
because I experienced just a lot of depression. I experienced regression in terms of continuing to wet the bed. There
Ah,
was just a lot of things that were happening. And so for me, um, in the foster care system, I find that a lot of times you feel powerless.
mm,
So it was in that time that, again, I felt really powerless and I didn't necessarily know what was going on. And then you have, when you turn 18, the aging out process where
yeah.
sort of just kind of dumped. And that was my experience. And
Mm,
so I felt like my entire time growing up, I never really got to establish stability. I didn't get to really establish consistent nurturance from my biological parents
wow.
in the system. And I also felt, more importantly, that my foster parents weren't necessarily prepared to
Mm,
handle and to deal with the trauma that I was experiencing. And
yeah.
so I think that it just really led to me suppressing a lot of the things that I experienced and not really being able to actually really talk about it. And so that's also really what propelled me to advocate for young people. And it was actually during my time on Capitol Hill that
Mm.
I got an opportunity to work in a senator's office. It was a congressional program for young people in the foster care system.
Oh,
And so that was
wow.
the other thing. I grew up and didn't know that other people were going through similar things that I was going through. So to have an opportunity to really give voice to that on such a public platform,
Yeah.
I decided to write a policy report where I wanted to focus in on how do we train foster parents, how do we train caregivers
Mm.
on trauma-informed training so that when young people enter in the system, they're not being dually traumatized, because we already know that when a young person comes into the system and gets removed from their families, that's a trauma within itself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when you bring them into the system and you have foster parents who are overwhelmed with their own things and have not
Exactly.
been properly trained, that they can end up doing more trauma. And so that was my experience. I had experienced more trauma, and there were times where I was like, I don't understand, why is it that I was removed from my home when
Mm.
I'm entering into a whole nother system that is doing the same thing.
Yeah,
So
that part.
yeah. So I think that was really what propelled me to give voice again to not just my experiences, but to
Yeah.
highlight other experiences that other young people were experiencing too.
Gotcha. Yeah. Wow. So you ended up, I'm curious about that. I did look at your bio and look through some of those things. How did you end up on Capitol Hill and being in this position to make the type of change that you were able to make at that level?
Yeah, it's crazy that you asked, because I was actually a sophomore in college and I found
Mm.
myself experiencing homelessness. And
Okay.
a mentor of mine when I was on campus, because during college breaks, a lot of times young people in the foster care system don't have anywhere to go.
Mm.
So you're trying to scramble and figure out what you're going to do. And
Yeah.
so it was my first Christmas experience in homelessness. And my mentor at the time decided to send me to a conference. It was a missions conference. To
Okay.
help me, have somewhere to go over the Christmas break. And I
Gotcha.
will say that I was really upset. I was annoyed. I was frustrated. I was sad, because I really wanted to spend it with a family that I could identify with.
Yeah.
But it was in that experience that I actually met someone at that conference. And I just decided to share with them a little bit of my own journey,
Mm-hmm.
and was interested in um, trying to figure out what I was going to do for the summer. So I needed to find a
Gotcha.
summer program. And so she ended up actually recruiting me for her summer program. But in that interaction, she was like, there's actually a program for young people who grew up in the foster care system to have an opportunity to go work on the Hill and
Wow.
be able to contribute to some policy changes. Would you be interested in knowing more about it? And so I was like, sure, yeah, I'm
Okay.
definitely interested. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that next summer, I ended up applying to the program and I got accepted. And
Mm.
I was nervous as all ever, because again, I was just like, the imposter syndrome. My first
Yeah.
time being introduced to, policies in a different way into the child welfare system. But it
Yeah.
was one of the most transformative programs that I could have experienced, because that program actually led me to being able to present my policy reports to
Mm.
members of Congress in the White House Domestic Policy Council under the Obama administration.
Mm.
There that I got invited to apply to be an intern for President Obama.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah, and so I think for me, again, as I think back on, my journey around growing up in the system and, being so frustrated that I didn't necessarily have a place to go, it was
Mm.
me not having a place to go that led me to being able to find my path.
Yeah. Wow. That's so dope that you got a chance to do that. I just want to say I saw the picture with you and Sister Michelle. And I was like, wow, you definitely have been able to make some change. And I was curious how you got involved there. Because I saw public health. Okay, that makes sense. But then I started reading more and I was like, wow, that's an amazing experience. So you've done a lot. Obviously to be able to be an advocate and to be able to help others. I'm just a little bit curious about, you had these things that helped you along the way in your adulthood, but what do you think helped you kind of overcome some of those adversities when you were in the system, in the thick of it all?
Yeah. One of the things that I will say is that I was very fortunate to have a great aunt who
Hmm.
instilled in me the importance of self-determination.
Okay.
And so I remember from a very young age, I was always determined, but I
Hmm.
didn't necessarily know how I was going to live out that determination, because again, I felt like I had a lot of odds stacked against me. Not
Mm.
only was I experiencing the foster care system, but I was experiencing someone who also had learning challenges
Okay.
from the drug use, and so I struggled with learning disability, and so I felt like I always had to work harder to try to find my way.
Yeah.
But I would say that instilling in me um, the importance of self-determination, growing up in the church, which I also felt contributed a lot to sort of my success,
Mm.
because again, those things that you get taught in the church are things, those values, those core values that you
Yeah.
get taught are things that I carry with me even today. And so for me, again, I think the other part about it is I also heard the message, don't end up like your mother and father. And
Mm.
I can now see how problematic that is today. But
Yeah.
during that time, um, I was so determined not to become that I said, okay, it was just drilled to me that I couldn't be anything other than that. And
Gotcha.
so that's really also what propelled me to say, okay, I have to do something different. And I
Mm.
wanted to do something different. And I was just, it's like one of those, like when you're a kid, you know how when you're a kid and you say, oh, I can't wait till
Mm.
I grow up, I can't wait till I grow up.
Yes,
That was sort of on my
unfortunately.
mind. I know, right? And then when you're adult, you're like, dang, I wish I was just a kid, you know,
Right.
because adulting is hard. But I
Exactly.
would say that I just had this part of me that really was determined to do something better and to do something
Mm.
different. And I've always been on the search of figuring out who I am and what is it that I like to do and how is it that I can
Mm.
contribute to society in a meaningful way. And so
Gotcha.
I think that's really what propelled me. And then again, you know, when you experience trauma, you don't want to have that feeling anymore. And
Mm.
so you work so hard to not feel that. And that's something I'm learning too about how do I actually embrace pain in a good way. And I think
Yeah.
that's what's really hard to accept.
Yeah. I mean, it can definitely be difficult to come to that place of acceptance. I know for me, it took years of therapy to get to that place of being able to accept growing up in an environment where I was raised by you mentioned your great aunt earlier. I was raised by my great grandmother and my great aunt from the time I was about 2 months old. And so it's definitely a different experience, being in the relative side of it where I was with them until I graduated, and even after I graduated, I would come back there. So my experience was obviously very different, but that self determination piece and that the piece about not being like your parents definitely resonates with me because crack epidemic in the 80s growing up, we know that that took a lot of our parents away from us and inhibited their ability to be parents, and so that determination piece is really important, and it sounds like it was a determining factor in driving you to your destiny in terms of just being the person that you are. I know you also talk a little bit in your bio about identity. I'm curious to know a little bit more about how this journey of really exploring yourself led you to be able to understand your identity and what that means for you.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good segue into the whole identity piece. And I would say that the identity piece has always been a difficult one. And I say,
Mm,
first of all, I identify as gay.
okay.
So being able to really fully accept myself, I would say has definitely been a journey
Hmm.
because a lot of my journey, again, and a lot of my identity was sort of weaponized and demonized. And
Ah.
so to know that who you are and how you're trying to figure out who you um, are sort of demonized,
Hmm.
I think that it really takes away from you being able to really accept who you are. So for
Mm,
me, I feel like I've been just really spending my lifetime really embracing my identity and embracing
wow.
and embracing other parts of who I am. You know, for me, I felt like growing up in foster care, you know, the label that was placed on me was that I was just a foster kid. You
Mm,
know, I was also just black, you know, and I was trying to figure out who am I in addition to these identities,
mm,
because oftentimes when you have those labels placed on you, those labels are all of who and what you become. And so I
yeah.
think that it really put myself in a mindset that I was coming from a place of deficit, especially when it came to the
Hmm.
aspects of being in foster care. But now I wear it as a badge of honor
Wow.
because a lot of us haven't been able to survive these really difficult times, And so for me, I find that in addition to me growing up in the foster care system, I
Mm-hmm.
recognize that I'm also someone who's creative.
Mm,
And that's really what led me to write my book, is because I was always someone that got lost in reading. I loved
mm,
to read. That was how I coped through my trauma. And I
yeah.
also liked to write. But it was in these experiences, such as growing up in the foster care system and
Mm-hmm.
having, and then also being violated, where people were reading your things. It really
Yeah.
caused me not to write.
Mm,
And so part of me taking back parts of my identity is confronting those really difficult parts that have been demonized or that haven't
mm,
been uplifted. And I think that those to me are really important. And so as an adult, I find myself really trying to heal the inner child and meet the
mm.
inner child, because
Okay.
for a really long time, I wasn't allowed to do that. And so now it's like, okay, Amani, you do like to write. You do
Mm,
like to do all different types of things. You're a creative. And so how do I embrace those aspects in me, in addition to me also being Black, in addition
yeah.
to also being gay, in
Mm,
addition to me also growing up in foster care?
yeah. Wow. I love that answer for a number of reasons. Just because it is something that I feel like just society as a whole, and especially I'm from the South. So in the South, obviously being gay is taboo, and, mixing that in with church, that just adds a whole different dynamic to it, and I can relate to my going through that process as a child as well, and coming out. I think I came out when I was 19, and that whole experience of going through that and having my sexuality used as a weapon and having religion used as a weapon to attack. In the middle of some stuff right now with my mom, but we won't get into that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
nevertheless, I think it's so great that you have allowed your journey to not only be something that, inspires you and helps you move forward, but also allowing it to be something that inspires other people. I Part of my journey led me, growing up with my situation, of being raised by my great grandmother and my great aunt, and not having my mom there. My mom was in prison for like the first couple of years of my life until I was like third grade, I think is when she got out. And going through that experience made me want to become a therapist. It was that made me want to be able to help other kids that were dealing with depression and anxiety and all of those sort of things. And so right out of undergrad, I started working with kids that were in placements, like group homes and things of that nature. And so, like, you share a lot of those type of tools that I think would definitely be able to help a lot of kids in foster care. I'm just curious, what pushed you to allow your journey to inspire other people in order to be able to help them?
Yeah. I think that, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing about your own journey. I think that it's important, and it's uplifting and affirming
Mm,
that I'm not alone. And
yeah.
for me, I think that, I guess, to be quite honest, I never really saw myself as an inspiration.
Mm.
I
But
just
you
saw,
are. I just want you to know that you
yes, yes,
definitely are.
I see it now, and I feel it now.
Yeah.
Um, I will say that for a really long time, I mean, I struggled with, again, like my identity and
Mm,
accepting who I was and who I am. And it wasn't until, like I mentioned, that I had that opportunity to be able to advocate for other people, like within, like similar to myself.
hmm.
And I was like, oh wow, I am an inspiration, and
Yeah.
I did survive, and I more than survived, but I've thrived. And I just remember, even just as I shared my story, because it was another thing I didn't really do. It was
Hmm.
something I really kept silent for a really long time.
Mm.
And it wasn't until at the age of 20, I was diagnosed with PTSD, major depression, and panic anxiety.
Oh, wow.
And for a lot of people, that would be really overwhelming. And it was
Mm.
overwhelming, but it was one of the most freeing things that I could have experienced, because it was the first time that I was aware of what was going on with me. I
Gotcha.
was in therapy from the age of like 6,
Mm.
after I had been violated by my uncle.
Mm.
And I didn't really understand why I was in therapy. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed with those things that I began to really take control as to how to really deal with my mental health. And
Yeah.
as I began to deal with my mental health, the things that I was very silent about, I began to speak up about it. And it was in that time of me speaking up about it was that when people would say to me, Amani, you're such an inspiration. Amani, when are you going to write your book? When are you going to speak? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? And it was there that I was like, oh, wow, I am an inspiration. And because I'm an inspiration, I want to be able to inspire other young people, and not just inspire other young people for myself, but to inspire other young people so that they themselves can see that they too are inspirations, and that despite and even in spite of my accomplishments, like, yeah, I've, worked at the White House. Yeah, I, you know, have different degrees and all sorts of things. What I'm also recognizing today is that those things don't also really matter. For me, somebody waking up and getting out of the bed is just as inspiring as someone, working an 8-hour shift that feels really difficult. And so I feel like I've also learned how to redefine inspiration and success, because a lot of it has to do with the things that you do. And I really want to focus on how do I just also be, and can I be inspiring just as in who I am. And so really trying to embody and embrace that is a journey that I've been on more recently.
Wow. I'm here for all of that. I think that that's definitely a good way to look at it. Like just being able to be yourself and do just the regular mundane things, day to day life tasks is really important, because it doesn't take something grand in order to be influential or to be important or meaningful. It's all about us and how we view and see ourselves. But you are an inspiration just by virtue of the fact that you survived a lot of stuff over the course of your life. I don't know how old you are, but you don't survived a lot. And I'm appreciative of you sharing those things with the world, because I can only imagine the things that you must have saw in the foster care system. What would you say was one of the most difficult things? And it doesn't have to be specifically to the foster care system, but what would you say was one of the most difficult challenges that you've been able to overcome?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Back in 2017, like I shared with you, I had two siblings, and older brother and a younger sister, and we were a pact, and that was something that we sort of identified from a very young age, that it was something that we were going to stand by and really operate out of no matter what.
Okay.
But in 2017, I ended up losing my little sister to suicide,
Oh,
and
wow.
that has been one of the most difficult things that I've experienced to this day, in
Yeah.
spite of the things that I've experienced in the foster care system. And I say that because, my sister and I, we had, different trajectories, even though we lived in the same house, even though we grew up in the same environment. Um, Unlike me and my brother, where we were left in the hospital, my sister was actually living with my mom on the streets for about 6 months. So we know about attachment.
Wow.
And at 6 months is when she was removed from my mom.
Gotcha.
So she had an attachment to my mom that we didn't have. And I saw how that played out in her life, and just the just how much she wanted that relationship with my mom and wasn't able to have and establish. And so her life, I will say that as she was navigating her journey around mental health, domestic violence, homelessness, all of those different things that we often see that young people experience when they've gone through the foster care system or experienced trauma, to see that she wasn't able to survive that really broke me, because I felt like she was born in pain and then she died in pain.
Yeah.
And to know that someone had to go through all of that when they didn't necessarily have to, I would say has been really hard. And I would say that the grieving process of that, like it changed me. And so that's why I talk about the fact that, these accomplishments, like, they matter, but then they don't, because at the end of the day, I felt like I was like on a trajectory. I had just graduated from getting my master's, and it was when I received that call that, she had transitioned, it just really broke me. And
Mhm.
so how I've been navigating that, I don't want to say that I've overcome it, because I really don't know if it's something that I can overcome.
Yeah.
I would say that it's something that I've learned how to navigate and move through. But to be quite honest, it's been really difficult, because
Mhm.
again, like, I don't think that our bodies were meant to handle this amount of trauma.
Mm.
And for, as you know, for us, even as Black people, we've already endured a lot of trauma,
Yes.
historical trauma and oppression.
Exactly.
And in addition to experiencing those things, we're having to also navigate really hard things in our lives. And so to know that I lost my sister was actually another reason and what propelled me to write this book, because
Um,
she was the one that said to me, sis, and it was actually during my coming out process. She was one of the people
uh,
that I told. And she said, sis, always remember that you are the prize.
mm,
And that stuck with me. And I wanted something to remember her by and to honor her legacy with, because for me, it's like, that's really what keeps me, is a reminder of her own words to say, sis,
mhm.
always remember that you are the prize. But
Yeah.
also there's that deep sadness that she herself didn't get to see that or experience that.
Mm.
And so for me, that's another reason why I'm inspired to continue on this journey, so that people like her know that in spite of the things that they've gone through, that they still are the prize, and
Yeah.
that we just need to have more supportive things in place, which is another reason why, again, like, I'm really thankful for this podcast, to talk about, or like what it means to like be effed up and also be
Mm.
self-aware that you're effed up. It's really important for me to embody that language, because
Mhm.
I recognize that the strength that I had has changed. And I
Mm.
just want to be honest with that. Grief and death changes you in
Exactly.
ways that I just never ever imagined. And I've experienced loss throughout my life, but it's been ambiguous loss, as you know. Ambiguous loss is when, your parents are still around, so there's still that hope
Mm.
that you can see them, that you might be able to still build and navigate a relationship with them. But then death is final in a lot of ways. And so now I'm really just trying to also rethink how how to even think about death as well, and how to embody that, even though she's not here with me presently, how do I
Mhm.
still connect with her in a spiritual way? So
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, even the language you use says definitely that you're still in a place where you're shifting your views on death. Like I use the word terminology transition. I know a lot of people don't like it because they feel like, oh, what do you mean? But it's really about the connection. We all, this is flesh, this is blood, this is clay, if you want to go from a biblical standpoint, but it's the spirit that counts. And so our spirit transitions in some way. So, even that language lets me know that you worked on some healing, but definitely, I agree with you. I don't think it's something you get over. It's something that you get through. And we learn to live without the people that we love the most. And I definitely, I hate to hear about the loss of your sister. And that hit me a little bit differently. As someone who works in suicide prevention, that definitely hit me a lot differently. And so I'm really sorry for your loss, because it is something that it's an ongoing grief process for you. But I do thank you for being open and sharing that, because I mean, suicide is something that impacts a lot of people. Working for a crisis line, I see it and hear about it all day, every day. But there's this idea that Black people don't deal with stuff like that. Black people don't take their lives. And I think that that's part of the stigma that we do need to remove. Checking on your strong friends, knowing that they need your support, just because someone's not calling you or texting you, you never know what someone's going through. So I definitely appreciate your vulnerability with that. I probably wouldn't ask you that question if I had knew you was going to do that, because there's that part of me that wants to kick into therapist mode, but
yeah.
I'm sure that you've kind of done the work to be able to work through that. And if you haven't, I would definitely recommend that for you.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you asked me that question, because I think just like what you said, suicide, especially in the Black community, has been stigmatized. And
Yeah.
It's not something that I just recently started talking about it when
Okay.
I wrote my book, because it was in my book the first time that I've shared what
Wow.
happened. And I felt like I was in a lot of denial about it for a
Hmm.
really long time. But I do think that being able to openly talk about it is something that's really important, because that's really where healing lives. Um,
Hmm.
it's where healing thrives. And it's in these moments when you are able to share parts of you that people probably don't always know and see, because they
Mm.
do see me as a strong person, but they
Yeah.
don't really see what internal battles I experience and face on a daily basis, because you have to really even change and rethink and reshift the way
Yeah.
that you live your life and the way that you think about things and the way that you see things. And so being able to openly talk about it helps me to continue to um, open up the platform for more people to share about suicide ideation
Mm.
and even the experience around their losses. So I appreciate that you've allowed me to have a safe space to be able to talk about something like this.
Awesome. Well, thank you definitely for your vulnerability, because I definitely think it will help a lot of people. I think this the your testimony obviously is going to help so many people. I'm sure it's already helped so many people. So, what's one thing that you wish people knew about growing up in the foster care system, or what's a piece of advice you would give to those that may be in the foster care system right now? Piece of advice you would give them to help them through some of the challenges that you faced before?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that what I would want people to know about the foster care system, I feel like there's so much to sort of talk about and address, but I think to keep it brief, the one thing that I do want people to know is that young people who are a part of the foster care system, even though they may have experienced trauma and have
Hmm.
experienced hardships and have experienced all different types of things, that there's still resilience that exists within us. And
Yeah.
I say that because I come from a lineage of resilience,
Mm.
and I was born into resilience, even in the womb.
Yeah.
And I find that oftentimes when we come into spaces where we want to help people, we often have a savior mentality. And what that ends up doing is that it ends up furthering the belief that you're not good enough, when in fact you are good enough, and that you just need extra supports to help you navigate and to continue to flourish
Yeah.
in who you are. And I would say that for young people that are in the foster care system that are navigating that journey, or who have navigated that journey, is that we are still whole. We're still
Mm.
whole beings. And oftentimes, we're told that we're broken, or that we're damaged, or that we're not good enough. And the reality is that when we were created whole. We were created
Mm.
whole beings. There were just things that happened to us that interfered with that.
Yeah.
But the crux of who we are, we're still whole. And most importantly, that as we all navigate our journeys of trauma, hardships, and difficulty, is to give ourselves more grace and to
Mm.
recognize that healing is a lifelong journey. And I think for me, for a really long time, I was placing so much, and I still can place so
Mm.
much pressure on myself to just get it right, or to um, navigate this and navigate that. And what I'm recognizing is that I didn't always have the tools to be able to navigate that. And I'm
Okay.
still learning those tools every day. And so, if I'm able to give myself grace in that and to recognize that healing is a lifelong journey, it allows me to open my eyes and to walk into spaces knowing that there's still room to heal.
Yeah. Wow. That's definitely a word. I think it'll preach for some people. That's especially that resilient piece. But definitely going back to that, giving yourself the grace to continue to grow and not have to be perfect. I think that's we definitely got to break down that idea that perfection even exists to begin with, because it doesn't. It's what we make it. Everything around us is a construct of what we make it to be. But I definitely appreciate you sharing that, because there are so many people out there, with all of the stuff that's changed with Roe v. Wade and all of this stuff, there are going to be a lot more people, unfortunately, in the
Yeah.
system that will need support as a result of that. But I just really wanted people to be able to connect with you. So, how can they connect with you? How can they purchase your book, reach out to you for speaking engagements? Because you have a lot of great information that I think we need to get into people's hands. So, how can they connect with you?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, first, I just want to show and share my book, You Are the Prize. And you can
Okay.
find this on Amazon. I also would like to share that I recently became a #1 bestseller on Amazon a few weeks ago. And
Okay.
so just want to thank everyone who's supported me thus far. But you can find my book on Amazon. You can also find me on www.amanimotivates.com if you
Okay.
want to book me to come speak at your next event or conference or any type of meetings. I am
Mm.
definitely open and available. And what was the other question that you asked?
Basically, how can they connect with you? Like, if there's social media they can connect with you
Yeah,
on, or any other way that they can outreach. So, I think we
you,
covered two of those, but I don't know if we covered the
yeah,
last part.
yeah. You can connect with me on Facebook at Amani Motivates, and you
Okay.
can also connect with me on Instagram at Amani Myers. So those
Okay.
are the places that you can connect with me at.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll make sure that all of your information is in the description of the episode so that everyone can know how to get in contact with you. And I will be purchasing your book right after we finish it. So
Oh,
thank you
thank
for
you.
that. But before we get out of here, I wanted to see, is there anything else you wanted to share with the audience?
I just want to say, we live in a world full of intricacies and just challenges and so many things I feel like a lot of us can now relate to because of the pandemic. And
Mhm.
just just know that you're not alone. I find that being able to speak up and to speak out about the things that I've experienced has allowed me to feel and be more freer
Mhm.
because I've been able to meet other people who've experienced similar things. And so I just want people to know that even though you might feel like you're alone, and those things are real feelings, that there are other people that are experiencing something similar to you, and that it's not the end all be all. It's what I'm also learning too is that things happen in moments, and today you may feel really crappy and effed
Mhm.
up, and tomorrow you may feel like the prize. And so
Yeah.
I just want to share that it's a journey that I'm consistently navigating and reminding myself that in spite of the things that I've gone through and the things that I will go through, but the things that I've learned is
Mm.
that I'm an inspiration and that I am the prize and so are you. And so I just want to thank you again for having me on your podcast. I just again am very, very appreciative to
Mhm.
being able to connect with you and to even just you sharing. I had no idea the things that you
Gotcha.
shared. And it
Gotcha.
allowed me, because of that, it allowed me to feel more freer and to feel more open to sharing parts of who I am that I may
Mm.
feel more nervous to share about. So thank you for
Gotcha.
cultivating a safe space for me and for the audience as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm grateful for you for being so open and transparent about your journey, because if we want to take it biblical, we're overcome by the words of our testimony. That is what allows us to be able to change and help motivate people. Amani motivates. That's what you do, and you are the prize. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for being a prize, and thank you for sharing your gift with the world. You guys, please make sure that you connect with Amani and make sure you buy her book. Reach out to her for speaking engagements. She is awesome, as you guys have heard. So make sure you guys connect with her. Also, make sure you guys connect with me, Treaty LPC, on all social media platforms under the handle at Treaty LPC, or reach out to the Unique Destiny website. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you for the continued love and support. Also, I'll make sure that I put the information for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline in the description as well, so that if you know someone that is dealing with suicidal thoughts or having any type of mental health crises, that they can reach out to 988 at any time, day or night, and someone from that line will be able to help them. But again, until next time, take care of yourselves, continue to be safe, continue to be well, and make sure that you take care of your mental health. If you or someone that you know is dealing with suicidal thoughts or a mental health crisis, please reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 988 Veterans Press 1. You do not have to suffer in silence.